Okay, we're going to continue the tutorials exploring different ways of adding color casts to an image. In the last tutorial we looked at using the actual duotone mode in Photoshop to create an actual Pantone color separation for two-color printing. Now we're going to go back to more of a CMYK printing scenario where we've got full color printing. We just want the image to have a similar color cast to some of the corporate colors in the palette. So the first thing we should do is just go back to grayscale. So image mode, grayscale, discard our duotone information, absolutely. That's going to return us back to regular grayscale. Even if we completely mess with the transfer curves in the duotone, stripping that away strips out the transfer curves as well. We're back to the grayscale image as we had originally created it. Okay, so in order to be able to add color effects to the image, we need to go back into a color mode. You can choose RGB or CMYK, either one works here. The preferred method is to work in RGB until you're ready to convert the image. I'm not going to go into the great detail right now. Don't want to invite any flame wars in my Yahoo channel, YouTube channel chat, but RGB is definitely the way to go as far as doing color adjustments and color manipulation, and then you convert to CMYK once you know what your printing process is going to be and what your press is going to be, what inks you're printing with and so forth. You need to be able to accommodate for all that stuff, so you stay in RGB. Okay, so we're in RGB now. That unlocks our adjustments palette again, and let's just explore a couple of different things that we can do to add some color to this image. So one of the cool things that we can do is we can apply a photo filter. A photo filter is a really nice way of adding a color cast to the image. We're starting with a grayscale image here, so when we add the photo filter, that's just going to basically create a color overlay. This is very similar to working with the duotone, except for we don't have quite as much control over the we don't have any control over the transfer. We can control the density. The density allows us to basically control the intensity of the saturation of the color that's being added. You can see here this color here is being added. That is chosen as a default by one of the filters here. And there's a whole pile of filters that you can kind of play with. But really what you're going to want to do is, if you're working with a corporate color, is to click on the color and to actually dial in the color you're looking for. Once again, back to color libraries, you can just type. I just typed 307 on the keyboard. That automatically jumped to Pantone 307. Press OK. And once again, we can control the intensity of that effect by playing with density. Because each color has a different sort of perceived luminosity value, this checkbox here allows us to compensate for that. When that's turned off, the image could look either blown out or washed out depending on the color that you've chosen. So if you looked at blue, for example, will look washed out. Yellow may look blown out. Because those colors, we just perceive those differently. Okay, so that's pretty cool. This actually works really well in a color image as well. So yeah, because we were working with a grayscale image, we don't have any color information to play with at all, so this basically looks extremely monochromatic. However, if we were to back up a few steps and actually go, I'm just going to revert this image. Maybe I don't want to revert it, actually. I'm just going to undo a bunch of times to get back to our color version. There we go. So starting with the color, applying the photo filter allows us to preserve some of that color that's in the existing image, which is actually kind of cool. So 307, and you can see that it doesn't have a very strong effect until I start to jack up the density. And this is actually a very different feel to what we had before. The black and white version of the image, when we applied that color, the whole image went really, really blue. Here, the image now just is adopting this kind of blue color cast to it, as opposed to, but it's still keeping some color variation in there, so you can tell the difference between the flesh tone, for example, and the shirt. This is a really nice, subtle way of applying sort of a uniform color cast to an image. So I recommend playing around with that. Okay, so that's photo filter. There's other things that we can do within the adjustment palette, and basically almost any of these adjustments can become a color adjustment. So even levels, for example, if we break levels out, instead of using the global level adjustment, if we break into individual red, green, and blue, allows us to play with the amount of those colors in the image. Here I'm just adjusting the gamma slider on the red, and then I'm going to sort of take it down to the green. That's going to leave us with... Now this is not going to give us an exact color, So matching to a Pantone could be tricky unless we bring in just a little bit more information. So to do that, we'll go to the Window menu, Window, Info, and I'm just going to dock that up here somewhere. Where have I got some room? There we go. And you can see now as I'm rolling over various areas of the screen, I'm getting readout in RGB and in CMYK. I can add additional spots to this image if I select my eyedropper tool. And hold down the Shift key. You can see that as I hold down the Shift key, the eyedropper tool adds a little crosshairs to the eyedropper tool. And then wherever I click now, it's going to set down kind of a permanent spot. You can see over here, the spot number 1 is now going to be permanently monitored. And so I'm going to just set down a couple of spots. So I've Shift clicked and I've set down 3 more spots that I'm going to be monitoring. And I'm going to monitor their HSB values. And so just, so what am I looking for here? Well, I really want that HSB value to reflect the HSB value, or to be close to the HSB value of the, or at least the hue anyway, of the Pantone color in question. So just to remind ourselves of that, I've clicked on the color swatch. I'm going to go to Color Libraries, dial in 307, and whoops. Sorry, and then hit the picker and just remind myself what that hue is. So 202 is what I'm looking for. That's the magic number over there. So I'm looking over here. Here's 308, 338, and 322. I'm looking at that second number. The first number is the original hue. The second number is the one that's going to be applied after as a result of the adjustment change. So let's just sort of play in the red, green, and blue channels and see if we can get ourselves closer to that number that we're looking for, 202. So as I play with the blue in the midtones, you can see that in some of those areas I am getting close. I don't want to go too far because then I really lose a lot in my image. So I can either play with the white point slider as well. It gives me a bit more control of the dynamic range. I can also decide that I want, yeah, that's not going to help. Let's go and take a look here. I need to work with my green channel. That's going to cool it down a lot. And so now I'm getting 200 over there. Number 2 has never changed. That's up in the skin tones. That's already got a very yellowish kind of feel to it from the original image, as you can see. So we're not going to really get that where we want it, but we can look at certainly a more neutral part of the screen is actually a part of the image is a really good one to look at. So item number 3 is going to be good. This one was already blue, right? The shirt was already blue, so that one's going to obviously be the one that's most close. So let's just kind of concentrate on item number 3 and see if we can push it. Taking out even more green. Was it 202? What was it? What was that color we were looking for? Hue of 202. Alright, so we'll need to move to the red now. And you can see now we're getting really close. I'm just going to pull it up until it says exactly 202. And there we go. Now I may feel that image is now darkened too much as a result of all this manipulation, so then I can go back to my RGB and compensate for that and lighten it up. So what this has done that the photo filter wasn't able to do is really able to preserve the overall contrast of the image, but so we've created a real strong sense of color cast. It's almost as if it was done with lighting as opposed to being done as a filter being applied afterward, because we're really just adjusting the individual RGB channel levels. So there, so something like that. So if that works for levels, it'll work for basically anything else that adjusts color. So I'm just going to delete my levels adjustment layer, hitting the delete button, and let's try something different. So maybe we can play with selective color, which I never know what it looks like. There we go, selective color. And we can do the exact same thing. So these color spots are still, these samples are still in there, so I can just still keep looking at it. And I can say, okay, you know what, in my reds I really need to take away the magenta, take away the yellow, which is going to sort of skew me toward blue, and add in a bunch of cyan. Okay, good. That's the reds. What about the yellows? Anything going to happen in the yellows? Okay, so what we're going to do is certainly pump up the cyan in the yellows. And you know I'm going to use absolute mode as opposed to relative mode. So the difference between those two, relative looks at the amount of the particular color that you're adjusting in the image, and the adjustments that you apply are relative to the amount of that color. Sort of scaled back by the amount of that color in the pixel. Whereas if we have absolute mode, it just applies to anywhere that color is present. It applies the exact amount. So you're always going to get a much stronger effect when you use absolute. So let's just continue with this a little bit, trying to go toward blue. Yellow is opposite blue in the color scale, so we know we need to take yellow away. So ironically, I'm taking yellow out of the yellows. That's of course going to really make this image look pretty monochromatic. In fact, it looks like I may have gone a little bit too far, or maybe just not quite far enough. Magenta is probably going to get me there, and or somewhere very, very close. So that's totally different look and feel. And of course, I'm just doing a real quick job here. There's probably a lot to be played with. Certainly in the neutrals, we're going to want to play around here. One really quick thing to do is play with the blacks in the neutrals. That's a good way of sort of filling in the image a little bit to get a very, very different look. So selective color is another one you can do. Curves is another one you can do. So you can try a lot of these different areas. As long as you've got your color reference here, you're going to be able to hit those targets.